Guys and girls, how are we doing? TBM Legion, hope you guys are doing awesome. Today we've got another episode of Fitter Body, Stronger Mind, talking about a super exciting topic today, which is broadly described as brawn and brains. Okay, so that means we're going into a discussion about the connection between physical fitness, exercise, okay, and cognition, thought processes, health of the brain, and all of that good stuff, okay, because it's pretty widely accepted now, especially amongst fitness professionals, high performance athletes, high performance business people, high achievers across the board, that there's a quite clear, obvious connection between these two things, between exercise and our ability to think. Okay, that's been pretty well regarded throughout the centuries by various sort of wisdomous teachers and things, but modern science is showing us more and more evidence as to why that is the case, and how we can harness fitness and exercise essentially as a superpower to level up every other aspect of our lives. Okay, this is why, you know, I've had an evolution that's gone from fitness to high performance, health and high performance across the board. This is the reason why I now work closely with execs, people who are very much just as interested in things like career development, personal relationships, that kind of stuff, as they are with getting fit, because there's such a distinct connection between these things. All right. Hopefully Gaz is going to join me at some point if he can get in there. But anyway, you're just going to have to stick with me in the meantime. So I thought a good opener for this would be a bit of a personal experience of a time where exercise and something else that I really want to talk about today, which is environmental enrichment, has played a huge role for me personally, being able to perform at my best mentally as well. And the best example that I could think of that was really quite interesting was the time during my career as a Royal Marine, where I was sent off on an exercise, huge strategic NATO exercise that was being conducted out of a military base right by the sea. And this thing was crazy. You know, I got sent there. No one really knew why a Marine was being sent there. I think they were hoping to get somebody from combat intelligence. Okay, I was in electronic warfare, so I was a signals operator. SIGINT collection operator. So I was basically trained to be able to take kit out in the field and listen into radio signals and figure out kind of what they were and where they were coming from and all of this good stuff, right? So I was within an intelligence branch, but I wasn't quite, I don't think, really looking for. Gaz, looks like you're able to make it.
Yes, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm just spinning one of my awesome stories right now.
Oh yeah,
good moment. Yeah, I was talking about the connection between fitness and cognition, basically, and I just wanted to give the guys that are listening an example of a time where that's really where combining the two has really helped benefit me for sort of full-blown optimum performance. So I was talking about a NATO exercise that I got sent away on when I was in the Marines. And I ended up sat, no one really knew what a Marine was doing there, I don't think. They kind of half expected me to come and half not. And I turned up, I got the warning order late and I turned up late. And I think they thought they were getting a combat intelligence guy. And they turned up with a signals intelligence guy. And so because I was a Marine, they didn't really know what to do with me. They sat me next to the Navy guys and put me in there as part of fleet. You know, like, I knew nothing about, you know, ships really or any of the stuff that they do on those. So it was all quite funny. It was all kind of semi-organized, like typical military, some idea of what was meant to be going on, but the execution was a bit woolly. And so I ended up sat with these guys. And anyway, it ended up that I got sort of, my job on this exercise was to pull in intelligence from various places and compile a report. Okay, way out of my league. I'd never done anything like this within the branch that I was actually in. I was used to putting a big bag on my back full of antennas, batteries, food, water, and ammunition, and then marching off in a direction until I could put together an OP somewhere. Not sat at a desk putting together presentation slides for a 1-star brigadier to report to later in the day. So it was all quite funny. But anyway, none of these guys were doing exercise, and it was like 13-hour days. 13, 14 hours just sat at a desk in a canvas tent, like a typical, exercise canvas, and sat at a laptop taking in all this intelligence and trying to put it together into some sort of like usable, presentable form. And we were briefed at the start of the exercise, guys, if you've been used to doing, exercise as part of your routine, feel free to keep that up. You won't be given time to do it, but you'll just have to find time in the day if you want to. And there was a gym on camp that we could go and use and stuff like that. So, but no one else in my cell was doing any kind of exercise. So for the first few days, I was thinking, maybe I should sort of take it on the chin. I don't want to be seen as the only guy who's like ditching my desk to go and do a couple of hours in the gym, vanity fizz on the on the bicep curl machine or whatever. So I kind of took it on the chin for the first few days, and I didn't do any exercise, and I really noticed this massive drop in my ability to do anything, after about sort of 8 or 9 hours sat in this tent. And so on about kind of day 4 or 5, I don't know if I mentioned it already, but this was being conducted out of a base that was right by the sea. And by about day 4 or 5, I was like, right, I'm going to add a dimension here that I think is going to really benefit me. And I decided to take a break in the afternoon to run out of the exercise area, down the cliffs, down to the sea. Bear in mind, it's like October time in southwest Britain. The weather wasn't great. I basically would run about 3 miles down the cliffs, down to the beach, down to the sea, jump in the sea in the freezing cold ocean, and then run back as fast as I could, quickly get changed, get all my stuff together, and then get back to my cell to carry on working. And the difference in my cognitive performance for the rest of the afternoon, following on from that bout of exercise, together with being outdoors, some cold therapy from the ocean, was absolutely profound. And I just remember that as being a time that really reminded me how important it is to include movement and to include environmental enrichment during times where we're working that hard and we're trying to get the most out of our mental performance. And the tragedy is that it's those times when we're really, really busy with those other things that exercise tends to get thrown to the wayside, doesn't it? Mm. So I thought that was quite a good example to open with, some personal experience where including that movement, including that exercise was absolutely critical to my total performance for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the function of dopamine?
Yes.
The neurotransmitter.
I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, well, everybody is. Without dopamine, you don't get anything done. And that's basically what you're hitting when you exercise. Is, especially if you enjoy it, or there's those moments where you enjoy it. There's also the endorphin hit, and serotonin from knowing that you've done something that benefits you. So I've said a lot of names of various compounds that affect our brains, but what do they do? So if there was to be a sort of hierarchy of order on, I'd say, which affects you most acutely, it would probably be endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, in that order. Endorphins, a lot of people have heard of. They're chemically fairly similar to opiates, And when people talk about runner's high or getting really excited on exercise, that point where you've gone past the point where you're blowing out your ass, and you've gone to that phase where you're actually starting to embrace the challenge of this physical activity, and these have been pumping out there almost as an analgesic. And what it does is it makes you feel good about what you're doing. Dopamine is a really interesting neurotransmitter in that you would not complete a task without dopamine. So to give you an example, think about eating something you really, really like. So if you were to eat, I don't know, chips and salt and vinegar or something, you eat one, your taste buds tell you that it tastes good. And why you think anything is good or fun is because of dopamine. So what dopamine does is it gives you a hit, like a reward, for doing things that you think you should be doing. So in this sense, your biology thinks you should be doing it because it's rich in fat, it's rich in salts, there's plenty of carbohydrates, it's nutritionally dense. And so your body's saying, oh, this is good stuff. My taste buds are telling the brain this is good stuff. It's highly nutritious. I want to, or it presumes it's highly nutritious. We know it sort of hacks the system because it's simple carbohydrates and probably hydrogenated fats. But your perception, your body's perception is, I'm a survival machine. There's a lot of calorie dense food here. I should consume it. So you get this hit from dopamine, and dopamine goes, that felt good. Do it again. And so you do it again to get that hit from dopamine. That felt good. Do it again. So you end up completing a meal, and then take that analogy and use that for any task. If you're getting things done, sometimes it can be stuff that, all right, this next example would normally sound pretty boring, but say you've got like a checklist or a sheet, and it's easy to check things off. I've got that, check. I've got that, check. It's almost enjoyable because there's a satisfaction of checking things off and knowing tasks are complete. And again, that's a dopamine hit. That's a dopamine hit going, that feels good. I'll get on to the next thing. That feels good. I'll check off the next thing. So when you're having these really productive days, and perhaps you've got a list and you're going through your tasks, it's that dopamine hit that makes you want to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And that is something that can be stimulated through exercise. Now, the great thing about dopamine and cognitive performance is it has a function, a role in helping convert short-term memories to long-term memories. So if we just take that back to, let's think in terms of pure physical performance, because it's the same with cognitive performance, a skill is really a pattern of memories. And that's why it's called a motor pattern. So what do I mean by a skill in this sense? Take any sport you like, how to serve in tennis. Your technique's going to be off at first as you learn, and then you get direction and you learn it and you learn how to do it properly. And this becomes what's called a motor pattern. Before you know it, you don't have to think about it. Whack, you can just serve in tennis. You can just throw a good left hook. You can these are different skills. You can ride a bicycle. You can, bowl a cricket ball effectively. All these different things are called motor patterns. And what they are is neurons, nerve cells, which is exactly the same as what your brain is made of, in that pattern. So every time you completed that task well, your brain remembered what you did well, both intellectually and subconsciously, and that dopamine hit that you got from performing it well makes you want to do it again, and it helps convert that short-term memory to a long-term memory. So what I'm drawing here is there's a weird kind of, it's not even weird when you really think about it, all of it is neurology. So how you wire your brain and how you wire your muscles to your brain are actually sort of quite similar. It's just about all those dendrons from nerve cells going out and connecting to appropriate places. So that happens in your brain, and it happens from your brain to your muscles. So a skill is a memory. If you've got a great skill, if there's something you do really well, whether it's tool use or, like I gave an example in all those sports, it's a form of a memory. That's called a motor pattern. But the patterns that you form in your brain and your cognitive performance, the more you exercise those areas and the more you do something, the better those neural links are. And the quicker that will happen, the more you essentially enjoy what you're doing. Now, dopamine can be, like many hormones in the body, it can be general as well as specific, because if it's this neurotransmitter is in the system, it can have knock-on effects on other things. So after you exercise, you feel like you've checked something off, you got your dopamine hit. Because of your serotonin, you're generally feeling good about life and yourself. You're ready to complete another task. You come back in and do your cognitive type tasks, whatever it is, your work, your brainiac stuff, and you're performing better. Because not only has your mood been enhanced for it, but actually you are more likely to release more dopamine and convert short-term memories into long-term memories. Perception plays a big role in this as well. When you don't enjoy something, it's normally because, one, the task might not be for you, it could be challenging, etc., but also you almost don't see a point in it. If you were to, disengagement. If you were to learn, let's say, statistics or calculus or accounting or something like that, just for the sake of learning it, you've got a spreadsheet, you've got some very dry factual information, it's boring as hell. But if you're running your own business, suddenly accounting becomes relevant and interesting and almost stimulating to you, because you've got real world examples and you know what you're doing, and you almost find yourself enjoying your spreadsheet once you get your head around it. So almost when the stars and the moon aligns, then it can become all right. And normally when it's relatively easy, when you've got all the answers. Again, when it becomes enjoyable, you get better at it faster, and you can hack the system in terms of your cognitive performance by going through that hierarchy of compounds your body produces that make you feel good. So I said compounds because they're a combination of hormones and neurotransmitters. So once you get those endorphins flying, you're going to get the dopamine going. And normally once you complete the task and you know that exercise has been good for you by perception, you feel good, and you generally have a sort of serotonin hit. And that serotonin puts you in that rest and digest state where you're able to perform cognitively better as well. It's basically your thinking time. That's physiologically what's happening. And the value of understanding physiologically what's happening, even if it's a brief overview like I just gave, then you know how to work the system with accordance to you and your life. You sort of, it's like the example of teaching a man to fish rather than giving him a man a fish. Once you understand that this will work, you can start timing your exercise into your life. So, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to train at this stage, and then have my work time, my desk time, X amount of time afterwards, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It's once you understand it, then you understand how you can start harnessing it to get the most out of all the other aspects of your life. I think, everyone or most people will have a general understanding that if you do exercise, and you eat well, that will have an impact on everything else. That will improve your mood. It will, I think, probably less people understand that it also will help with things like learning and actual process. But still, many people are aware of that, but they don't understand the mechanism by which that happens. So you're limited by how much you can use it to your advantage. Whereas when you understand that, like you were talking about there, doing exercise increases the development of memories, like you're talking about, that long-term potentiation. When you understand that, if you understand that you've got something that you need to research tomorrow and that you also want to go for a run, you now know that going for a run before you do that, maybe 1 to 2 hours, is probably going to increase the likelihood that when you do that research, that study task, you're actually going to retain more of that information. It's going to become consolidated in that process of, like you say, consolidating those pathways. I really like the term pathway relevant to the brain, because I really like to think of it in an analogy of like wearing a path through a field or wearing a path through a forest. It's a similar kind of concept. You know, the more a certain pathway in the brain is triggered, the more cemented it becomes. You know, it develops over time. And yeah, that's interesting what you're saying about, you know, the neurotransmitters and the different chemicals in the brain. And a kind of simplified way to describe it that makes it kind of relative to people in the real world, sort of medication wise and things, as you could say that doing a bit of exercise is a bit like taking a little bit of Prozac and a little bit of Ritalin, because Prozac is designed to stimulate serotonin and Ritalin is designed to stimulate dopamine, and you're kind of getting both of those in one hit. Obviously that's very simplified.
Yeah.
And what really happens is much better than that, because those lifestyle choices don't just increase one thing in another. They help regulate the balance of all of them, which is why it ends up in a much better positive outcome than, you know, relying on those drugs, not doing the exercise, not eating right, relying on those drugs, and then ending up in a bit of a car crash.
Being able to manage your hormonal state through endogenous, internal, your own sources is always superior to exogenous drugs coming in. And the reason why is, even though I've given a real sort of overview, and it sounds perhaps quite complicated if someone's never familiar with these terms. The hormonal system is so complex. Endocrinology is so complex. We virtually know nothing about it. So even the biggest experts that can talk for weeks on it are barely scratching the surface of this unbelievably complex chemical balance that is the human being, or even any animal, any mammal, any reptile, anything. It's been discovered all the time that hormones that you thought had a single purpose now have a dual purpose or a tri-purpose, or they have a knock-on effect that affects this hormone and that hormone and this new hormone that we never even realized, or, oh my God, I didn't even realize insulin also does X job as well as regulate blood sugar. You know, so there are so many factors at play. This is where it comes to just simply using nature as your filter and recognizing the animal that you are, almost from an evolutionary perspective, and trying to manage it yourself. So again, endogenous sources of these hormones and neurotransmitters and changing your hormonal state naturally is always going to be superior to trying to juggle things from exogenous sources. For example, normally when you take a foreign exogenous hormone substance, it normally tells your brain, the chemoreceptors in your brain will say, oh, there's a lot of this circulating now, I don't need to produce anymore. And brains can be a bit slow, like you often don't react to stimuli and stress. This is a form of stress. Anything that makes you change your state in this sense is biologically what's called stress. So any form of stress, you're actually normally a little bit late on. The body's normally a little bit late. What do I mean from that? Let's say the stress of heat. So it's a warm day today. My body cannot respond in advance to it being hot. So say, for example, I can't look out the window and go, it's hot outside, and start sweating before I get outside. I almost have to get a bit too hot before my hormonal response to the heat says, oh, start sweating, vasodilate, all the things I do.
Yeah.
So even though that's not what we're talking about cognitive capacity. If you can take that model, if you were to take exogenous hormones to change your emotional state, or your state of focus and things like that, once those exogenous hormones run out, your body's going to have a delayed process and going, oh, I need to make my own now. And so there's always that danger. And then you just end up opening up this complete can of worms where you're taking, another drug to, kickstart that. And that means that because you've got that drug in your system to kickstart the other process, you're going to be late on producing that one. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on down the chain. So in my mind, if you can do as much as you can using nature as your filter naturally, through exercise, through movement, affecting your emotional state, then more power to you. The caveat on what we just talked about, because you can go too far, and it's a very simple thing for everybody to understand. If you've got something to do in the afternoon and you feel like, oh shit, I better do a bit of exercise because that will make me function better, the degree of volume and intensity can affect as well. You can cross, it seems like common sense, but you can cross the line. So, but you might be inclined to think, oh, the more intense I go and the more volume I put in, then the better I'll perform, right? There'll be more dopamine, there'll be more serotonin, there'll be more of this. Yes, but you'll also be fatigued. And the brain basically runs on blood glucose. The brain is solely powered by blood sugar. So if you've done enough training that you're now either low on blood sugar or your body needs to repair the damage that the exercise has done to a great degree, well then physically you're going to prioritize that. So you're going to prioritize growth and repair over new learning. So basically there's just not going to be enough fuel to go around to do both, and your body will prioritize repair. So your cognitive performance in that sense, because of fatigue, will go down. So if you want to stimulate better performance short term, your exercise needs to be something that is essentially non-taxing, or not taxing to such a great degree that you're still going to be recovering 3 hours later.
I couldn't agree more. There's definitely something to consider. As you say, the brain is running pretty much solely on glucose, and if you're doing hard anaerobic training for a prolonged period of time, that's going to leave you glucose deprived. Your body's going to have to try and recuperate that somehow. It's also going to have that EPOC effect as well, where you're burning more oxygen post exercise, and the other thing that the brain is really, really hungry for is oxygen. So, that's two things that you're going to want the brain to be able to have plenty of in order to operate to maximum potential. So, I mean, I think probably the kind of all-round king for me, exercise-wise, for improving cognitive function throughout the rest of the day is probably aerobic work, like steady state aerobic work, with the caveat that a really short bout of something very intense could also have those other benefits, without putting yourself in that glucose deprived state that you've then got to recover for before you can start reaping the advantages of having done the exercise. So if I was going to sort of label two options for people who are thinking, what kind of exercise could I do now that would help my mental performance later on in the day, then my two suggestions would be, if you've got something quite taxing, quite cognitively taxing to do later in the day, as you say, not to go too intense, too far towards the intensity level of the exercise spectrum, and to stick either with something slow, steady state cardio, or to do some kind of HIIT training, but for a very short period. Probably less than 15 minutes, I would say. Anything over 15 minutes, probably leave yourself a little bit short supply.
But my personal favorite is if I've got a short period of time, would be Tabata thrusters. So just smash out a bunch of Tabata thrusters, even Tabata burpees, something like that. And normally, it depends on the weight you're using, but 2 rounds might leave me feeling tired, but one short round, if that's the space I've got. That's basically 4 minutes of hard fizz. Is for me is a real wake up call, and it leaves you, in layman's terms, it leaves you going woo afterwards, and that woo is kind of a high. And it's not been so much in volume. If I do the full 2 rounds, is the classic Tabata protocol. That maybe I'm going to be feeling sleepy and really, really hungry afterwards.
And then also, if you've got to eat, if you've got to really refuel, then you also need that period afterwards, because it's very difficult to be in a state of rest and digest and a state of high alert at the same time. They're two different. They're taken care of by two separate parts of the autonomic nervous system.
Exactly.
So you can't be digesting a big meal to try and reload the glucose you've just burned, and be writing the really important report for your, director.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think that's a great example that you came up with. Actually, the Tabata is really perfect for a number of reasons. That's not prolonged enough to have those potentially negative effects we talked about, like the glucose deprivation, but it's great at instantly boosting blood pressure, at increasing blood flow, which is actually going to send all those nutrients straight up to the brain where the action is happening, isn't it? That's the kind of instant physiological effect of short exercise, that blood pressure increase, that blood flow increase, and also. And I want to get a little bit more onto the environmental enrichment side of things as well, because this is the bit that really interests me probably the most. But that's also going to give you enough of a hit to start regulating the levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor as well, which we know basically enhances all of the stuff that's going on in the brain, like everything that the brain's trying to do, everything it's trying to learn, when it's be alert, when it's trying to consolidate those new pathways through the brain. BNDF is what makes that more efficient, isn't it? And it creates a larger pool of new neurons to potentially fire that the brain can use. So yeah. So I was wondering if maybe you had an example of a time where exercise has been a critical part of your own regime for also lending your.
I think always. My example really is opposite. I've always had an active lifestyle, and I've always trained. My first job was as an athlete, and then there was the TA, and then there's been running fitness retreats and things like that. So I've always been very active. And so my example is actually in reverse of when I've noticed myself being less active. I'm less creative, less sharp, less happy. That particularly happened to me when I first moved to the States. I was far more sedentary as I was, trying to find my feet and understand what was going on, and I didn't train anywhere near as much or go outside as much because I felt like, oh my god, I'm in survival mode here. I've got to be on the internet looking for things and working out what I'm going to do and calling, and end up really not doing a lot of that, but sitting around thinking about I should be doing that and going outside and training less, and then it was a point where I decided, screw this. Went out, with my rings, the old Olympic rings in a bag. Went running with them, found a tree, did some dips, did some pull-ups, made a
the
habit
rings
of it.
are so good.
They're brilliant.
Taken them all around the world with me.
Same.
These rings.
Same,
I've had them hung up in the porch of a beach bungalow in Thailand. I've had them hanging up in trees in Kenya.
They're brilliant. They're brilliant. But I've got back into the habit of it for a few days, and then I remember my wife saying to me when I first did that, she's like, "He's back," because there was an instant change in me. So my example's in reverse. It's in reverse. I find, once I get back into training, everything starts to fall into place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's just as likely to be a realization as the opposite, as the way I framed it, in the first place. And I would say that's more often than not, that's the way I see it as well, is in the times when I'm busy, because the same as you, I've always been really active, and I've always, without realizing it, I'm relying on that to be performing at my best. And then when it gets sidelined because I'm busy, it's like, oh shit, I've thrown this away because I'm thinking it's not a priority. But actually, the busier I am, the more of a priority it is. It's a bit like the Dalai Lama talking about meditation. It's like a little story I got spun by a meditation teacher. He was telling me that one of the Dalai Lama students went to him and said, I'm working twice as hard now. I don't have as much time for meditation. And the Dalai Lama says, well, if you're working twice as hard, you need to meditate twice as much. I think of that as same as fitness, you know.
Yeah.
Twice as much, but it's twice as important to do it, I think, is the takeaway. And that's one of the reasons why I've cultivated this habit, and I encourage a lot of my clients to do the same thing, especially the ones that are very busy guys, you know, like the execs and stuff that, you know, got really high pressure jobs, always traveling and stuff like that. I try to encourage them to cultivate these non-negotiable exercise rituals, so that if you've got a planned session that you know is going to get cancelled, or, you know, it's day 3 of the week and you haven't managed to get a workout in yet, there's like a non-negotiable superset of push-ups and sit-ups that takes, you know, 6 minutes to do. Bash them out back to back, you know, as many reps as you can each one. Like I say, done in 6 or 7 minutes, but that's like the non-negotiable, you know, exercise ritual that will take place if nothing else is going to happen. And it's amazing how much difference incorporating that into your day can make. And it seems crazy, and I know that people take it with a pinch of salt sometimes when I talk about it, like, yeah, really, 6 minutes, is it going to make that much difference? But it really can, especially if you're doing it, like we said, like Tabata type sets, or just to a high intensity that's enough to give you that wake up call. I really like the way you phrased it. It is like that. It's like a wake up call, get the body back into action. Yeah, for me, they really make a difference. So
yeah. I mean, that relationship with volume and intensity is very important, and there's a balance which results in consistency. So we tend to get caught up with reading research and programs from sports science that is very specific for full-time elite athletes. And so we know that, you know, an intensity level of, you know, 70% of your max heart rate over distance is going to improve your endurance optimally. But for the average person with lots of things on their mind other than simply their physical performance, it can be quite cognitively draining. It's a form of stress, because you probably don't get the true relaxation that an Olympian does or a full-time athlete does, because that's all he has to worry about. That's all their training is. That's all their life is their physiology, apart from their relationships and things like that. But in essence, that's what it is. So when you do your run, and, you know, and it's 70% of your max heart rate for endurance for at least 40 minutes and all this kind of stuff, and you're frankly bollocks afterwards, and then you've got a full day of work, or you're self-employed, or family obligations and things like that, you're not actually truly resting. So rest, in the term that I'm using it, is the physiological hormonal state of rest. So resting isn't stopping what you're doing, it's not stopping the activity, it's actually changing your hormonal tone. So it's going into that parasympathetic tone. Psychologically, you can maintain sympathetic tone, the adrenalized, stressful tone. So it might not, because that run ends up feeling so hard and taking longer to recover from, your consistency might not be there if you're trying to do that 70% of max heart rate, or, you know, 100% intensity on all your HIIT training and things like that, because you're a human being and you get put off doing it. So there's building on layers and layers of consistent fitness, repeating it when you recover over a long period of time is more important. So if it works for you that you end up going 60% of your max heart rate, but you end up doing it every day, well, in terms of volume over the year, that's way more activity and exercise than you ever did before, because you just got put off. So there's nothing right. It's not. This is, you know, a hard lesson for my personality type to learn. It's not soft to hold back a little, to have something in the tank. And though the athlete I'm about to talk about now was a bodybuilder, and it's not necessarily relative to a lot of people's goals or health. But Arnold Schwarzenegger, I remember reading his book, and he was training twice a day or sometimes 3 times a day, but he would, at least he stated that he would try and keep his training sessions down to 40 minutes. 40 minutes. It doesn't really seem a lot, especially when you've got to, do sort of 3 exercises per body part and all this kind of stuff and get all your sets and reps in. It doesn't seem like a lot of time to get that in. And he said he'd always leave himself wanting a little more, because then he comes back to the next session ready to engage. He comes back the next day ready to engage, because his is a long term. It's about year upon year, week upon week, month upon month, not just that one session. So your training isn't just that one session. Your training is that session and the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. And this is a long, long story. It's a lifestyle change. It's a habit. And habits are much easier when you don't have to absolutely hype and psych yourself up for them every single day. And again, don't feel like you're not on protocol, because those protocols you read about are relative to elite athletes, and that's all they have to do. That's what most of the studies are based on when you read them in the magazines and on the internet and things. So relating that to cognitive performance, you have to give yourself some space in your life where your rest and recovery that time is not going to impact on your, the time when you need your brain. So exercise to a degree of endurance, of volume and intensity that suits you. I'd love to give people a formula for that, but I can't, because everybody's an individual. They're all at different levels of training, and you all have completely different lifestyles and completely different interpretations of your lifestyle. So perception plays a massive role. Just like I said, I could do an intense bout of exercise and truly relax and absolutely just go brain dead for a couple of hours and eat, and my recovery is going to be so much more high quality than if I've got a little more a problem on my mind that I'm thinking about during that period of stopping, because then it's not true rest, because hormonally I've now got my adrenals going, I've got cortisol going. These are sort of catabolic. These are about getting me going, not about relaxing. So just because you stop what you're doing isn't true rest. And think about that in your timing between exercise and your period that you want to optimize cognitive performance. What is the intensity relative to true rest is the real question. Again, I can't prescribe as much as I'd like, because people want things like step 1, step 2, step 3, but it's so unique to you. You have to be armed with this knowledge. This is what I'd like to sort of do to anybody watching: arm you with the knowledge, and then you kind of go out and work out your own formula, because again, it is so specific to the individual, and there are so many factors. And just to quickly go over those factors again, those factors are your level of fitness, your lifestyle, and above all of them is your psychological perception of what is happening around you at the time. That is the biggest one that's going to change your hormonal state.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I couldn't agree more. There's loads of points on there that we could go into way more depth.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one of the things that I'm always dealing with clients especially is motivation, and not just for fitness but for every goal. And I always say that a big part of motivation is just momentum. It's maintaining that speed once you've gathered it. You need to motivate yourself a lot less when the stuff that you're trying to motivate yourself to do has gone from being the stuff that you're trying to get done to just the stuff that you do anyway, just the shit that you do day to day, which is another reason why I really try to encourage those non-negotiable sort of rituals, because it helps maintain that habit. Going back to what you were talking about consistency, it maintains that consistency, both in terms of the training stimulus, but also in terms of the psychological, behavioral habit, the mindset of, I'm still doing this. I did some exercise yesterday. You're still feeling good about that. When people start to struggle with their motivation, or during the weeks where they've gone, several days without doing anything, and then that demoralizing feeling starts to kick in. You can't even just make the time to do a short exercise. You haven't done anything for ages. That activity starts to breed that lethargy, and then again, that leads to that perspective shift that you're not in go mode, that you're not moving in the right direction more, and then that snowballs into one of those downward spirals where the less you do, the less happens, kind of thing. And I got asked an interesting question on a podcast I was on the other day with First Man, where because we've both got backgrounds where we've trained both, regular everyday people and also VIPs, high level kind of CEOs of multi-million-dollar corporations and stuff like that. And I was asked what the difference is between sort of training those sort of CEO, executive type, and my answer was really geared around this idea that action breeds energy. Those guys tend to have a lot of energy to train, even on the days where they're pedal to the back-to-back things. I mentioned the guy that I was training in the French Alps, who was an investment broker, and he'd be sat at the control center, beeps and whistles going on as trades are getting made, deals are getting made. He's got his team on the phone. Right, what's he saying? He's going to buy that. Okay, get him on the phone. Do this. Blah blah blah. Blah. And it's just like all go 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 go. And then there'll be that period in the afternoon where he just get up and be like, right, okay, let's go. Gym time. And these guys, granted that their shortfall often is, and that's what you're talking about again just now, it's actually going into the resting phase and actually resting. They're not very good at that. But what they're good at is getting into a state of go and just going and keep going, being ready to just go, go straight into exercise. Because that action breeds energy and they've got that momentum. They're all go. So the snowball effect is that they just keep moving and keep progressing. So I want to talk a little bit more about the disengagement as well that you mentioned earlier, because I was doing a few studies a couple of days about. I was looking to find data on the effect on activity within employees that are engaged in regular exercise. And I found some pretty typical stats that I expected to find, saying that people that were happier at work tended to be 12% more productive. That was a study done in the UK in Warwick. But the opposite was actually more interesting. It uncovered more statistics about people that were unhappy at work, and the impact of that was quite frightening. They were way more prone to absenteeism, way more prone to accidents and errors at work. What else? There was like a whole list of negative impacts from people that were just disengaged with what they were doing, not necessarily unhappy with it, but just
not into it,
not interested. And that's what they listed it at, was like disengagement. And it was quite frightening, like how poorer the of a person who's disengaged is compared to someone who's happy. And that kind of leads into the environmental enrichment factor. I was reading a whole bunch of rodents getting rats to run mazes, and they would take some of them out and put them in cages that had nothing, and then they would keep others in cages that had lots of to do, like running wheels and different things to play with. Some of them they would even take home, their children play with them, and then bring them back again and let them do puzzles. And all the ones that had lots of opportunities for environmental enrichment, a more stimulating environment, were way performing on the puzzles and would remember things better, remember the maze routes quicker. There was one where they were putting mice into where the water was opaque, and there'd be a platform somewhere in the pool that would allow them to get out of the water, because mice really hate water. And they were, the ones that had a lot of environmental enrichment, again, they'd be able to find their way to the platform again much, much quicker than the others. And a really interesting one that I found was about we won't talk about the ethics of the study, but cats that were raised with one eye sewn shut. Yeah. It's not the friendliest one, but they were exposed to this environmental disengagement, I guess, and that actually caused their brains to shrink over time in comparison with that were able to use both eyes. So it's not even just that environmental enrichment boost your brain power, but the opposite seems to degrade the health of the brain as well, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when you run that through the narrative of evolution and the purpose, chiefly, or one of the chief goals in evolution is to save energy. If you're not using a system, why maintain it? Why spend food energy on doing it? Because at the end of the day, food is something that either has to be hunted or foraged in nature. And so we're all animals, human, domestic, wild and domestic, are wired in that way. We haven't changed much in that sense. So if you need to put out less energy in activity, it's less chance of being injured, less chance of getting disease, less chance of being in contact with a pathogen, so on and so forth. Then and I don't need to maintain it. I seem to be doing all right, in terms of I function well enough for this environment. You don't need to get any better. So in that sense, how can I put it? Like, physiology has a natural leaning towards laziness, for want of a better term. It does enough. It does enough, which is essentially how fitness training works. It takes you to that point where your body questions if it's got the goods. Do I have enough? Do I have enough to, I got fatigued. I need to be able to run longer. I got fatigued muscularly. I need to be able to stay stronger longer. That kind of thing. I could not. I feel like I was at maximum capacity, almost overload, attempting to lift these things. So the amount of times I needed to, I need to get stronger. Or that was too much. Golgi tendon organs telling me that's too much tension on my tendons. I need to get stronger. That kind of thing. I need to thicken up. So yeah, if you don't need it, you tend to lose it, and obviously that's the same with your cognitive functions. And there are things that engage your brain more than just working out maths problems or how to spell. And your physiology is wired in such a way that it is prepared for the stimuli of a life in nature. So if you're not exposed to color and breezes and sensations on your feet and smooth and rough surfaces and all these kind of things, hauling your own body weight, having to haul other things, then your cognitive reasoning behind these activities, those parts of your brain, it makes absolute sense that they will degrade because you don't need them. And many of these parts of the brain do have a crossover. Now, you have to remember, a lot of the brain is in reserve, and there is such a thing as neuroplasticity, whereas just to simply get by in life, you don't need a lot of brain. There was that example of that Frenchman who had water on the brain. Have you ever heard of this one?
I think so.
So neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to adapt parts of the brain to do almost anything. And so there are centers of the brain in a typical brain that are responsible for, say, your sense of dead reckoning, which is your sense of direction, your interpretation of visual input. The limbic system releases various hormones. It's to do with that sort of fight and flight response. There's a lot to do with aggression. so there are centers of the brain that we realize are responsible for certain actions, but actually it does appear that parts of the brain can be totally rewired to do other activities and other responses. So there's this Frenchman with water on the brain, some kind of manual worker. He's always had water on the brain, something to do with like an edema in the center of his brain, and he goes for a long time without seeing the doctor. Everything's fine. He's not having any symptoms. One day he walks in. He's described as being below average intelligence at this point, but he's functional. He can get by. He comes to the doctor with headaches. When they do the brain scan, basically the whole center of his brain is filled with fluid, and there's a thin shell. I can't remember what it was. It may have even been down to millimeters, just the external portion, almost the surface of his brain that's functional, and it's had to learn to rewire and do other things. And so this guy's got very, very little functional brain, but he's still, a pretty normal person. I think he did end up dying in the end, but the lesson we learn from it is just how sublime the brain is and how you can kind of wire it to do almost anything.
It's amazing.
Speaking of brains, I can't remember sort of the original question, how I ended up going down that route. But
it wasn't really a question. I kind of just left it open for you. Talking about environmental enrichment and
that's
stuff.
it. Yeah. So yeah. If you imagine in terms of, that's where I was going with it. In terms of pure brain size, sometimes pure brain size doesn't necessarily indicate intelligence. It's more how wired the brain that you're using is. So how densely networked your brain is. And the idea is to try and, for the parts that you need in your life, to innovate those and not innervate, as in have nerves, connecting and running between the parts of the brain that are required. So just like you would develop a skill, like I talked about, that tennis overhand, or you'd serve, or throwing a really nice, hook in boxing or something like that, throwing a kick in martial arts. Just as that becomes a technical nervous muscle interplay, where muscles have to fire at the right time and nerves have to fire at the right time to make that action smooth. Well, think of neural pathways are like that as well. The more things you do and the smoother and less impeded you can link relevant parts of the brain to a specific activity, then the better your cognitive performance will be. So, if you can link your spatial awareness perhaps to your intellectual arithmetic ability, you suddenly become a very good land navigator if you're into orienteering or something like that, or a cab driver or this kind of thing. So the more you train those neural pathways, it's just like, it's a very similar process to developing a physical skill. And it's not necessarily the size of the brain, but how innovative it is and how well wired you can make it. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, because we say that we say connections in the brain, don't we? But nothing's actually the neurons aren't physically connecting, are they? Firing across the synapse using the electric charge and the neurotransmitters. So actually there is no physical connection. The connection is the ability to pass that signal from one neuron to the next over a gap.
Exactly.
And, that's why exercise plays such an important role, because it not only it regulates the neurotransmitters, so the chemical balance is right, so that those signals can get fired more efficiently. But we produce more of the dendrites, so the actual little tentacles that house the synapses, which then fire the signals. We produce more of those when we exercise. The myelin sheaths of those become thicker. Also, what tends to happen when a pathway is fired off on regularly is that the resting charge of the receiving synapse increases. So there's actually less potential required, less electrical charge required to fire that same signal again, which is why we get that muscle memory that you're talking about, that motor neuron memory, where we're able to just do things much more instinctively, much quicker reaction time, because it takes less stimulation to actually fire that same signal off.
That less stimulation, you mentioned the myelin sheath, requires good myelination as well. So what, for anyone listening, what a myelin sheath is, if you think about an electrical cable, an exposed electrical cable loses something of its charge for not being insulated. And essentially what a myelin sheath is insulation around a nerve cell. And again, it means you lose less on the way. So there's less it's less impeded.
Stronger signal, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a stronger signal from point A to point B. And that's very important. And apparently aspartame, your diet drinks, is something that impairs myelination and can lead to various...
there you go.
Yeah.
So it is the devil problems. After all.
Yeah, exactly.
After all these breakdown studies saying that it can't be converted into enough of the acid that it gets broken down into to cause any problems. It turns out it's just doing something else.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the ideas. I mean, I'd have to truly verify that, but it's, last time I read, which I have to admit, last time I read up on aspartame was probably around 2007. That was the argument.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of stuff around that, isn't there? That's a whole nother rabbit warren. Things will get discovered. So we've just hit the hour mark, so I think it's a good time to wrap up. There's loads of other stuff. I think we could probably just recap the sort of main benefits then of exercise that we talked about, which was that we're helping the production of those really important chemicals like the dopamine, which improves our mood, serotonin, which improves our mood, dopamine, which improves our ability to focus, and
convert short-term to long-term memories.
Yeah, and that long-term potentiation. So actually, converting thoughts into long-standing memories in the brain, and we can do all of those things by just any form of exercise. And environmental enrichment, I think, is really important. Not 100%. Just the environment that you're in, and changing it up, keeping it varied.
And then on the practical advice side, know your capacity for exercise. So when you select it, understand your capacity and understand what's going to leave you fatigued and what's going to leave you energized. That's the most important, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention as well, we've kind of been quite specific about fitness and thought process, but all of these things tie in with every aspect of life. That's why I call this as total health and performance benefits, because we talk about socializing, building personal relationships, influencing the people around you, all of that stuff that also gets improved through the generation of these through the stimulation of this neurology, doesn't it?
100%.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, thanks very much for you again.
Yeah.
I think we can leave the guys there. Guys, if you've already downloaded the Fitter Body, Stronger Mind ebook, it lays out all the essential principles of not just developing awesome fitness, but improving mindset, building a powerful, resilient mindset for success, and improving total health and performance across the board. You can download that through the link that I will add in either the description or the comments. Make sure that you get that. You can share this with anyone you think might find it useful. It's going to go up on the YouTube channel as well, which has a whole other bunch of videos and stuff with me and Gaz as well on there. So be sure to check that out. And more importantly than anything, have an awesome day. Dare to accomplish more. And we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Catch you later.